Welcome to our webinar, Preparing for the Holidays. This webinar is designed for people affected by dementia, primarily for those caring for or connected to someone who is living with dementia, but also for those living with dementia themselves. Some of the information may not be applicable to your current situation, but may become more relevant in the future as the disease progresses. You may find you have questions or concerns about this webinar after it ends. Therefore, we strongly encourage you to connect with the First Link Dementia Helpline at 1-800-936-6033. These numbers will also be on the last slide. December's just around the corner, and for many of us, we associate December and January, because we have our New Year celebration then, with various festivals, holidays, and family traditions. Participating in all of this involves a lot of socializing, both with family, friends, and members of our community. Whether you are the person living with dementia or a care partner, this time of the year can certainly substantially increase your amount of stress. In the past, you may have handled the stress and actually even looked forward to all the hype, the excitement of the season, and the preparation for celebrations. However, dementia changes the experience and can add a large dose of bad stress. It's therefore important to understand a bit about why things are changing and how we can adapt to these changes. We are not going to go into the details in this webinar. If you would like to understand more than we cover here about how dementia impacts the brain, I encourage you to watch or listen to the videos in the Understanding Dementia webinar. However, it is still vitally important to understand why things are changing for a person living with dementia. While there are several different diseases that cause dementia, they eventually become quite similar in their symptoms. Eventually, they lead to pronounced shrinking of the brain, a term known as atrophy. This image that we see on our screen now demonstrates what the brain of someone with advanced Alzheimer's disease would look like. And that's the image on the right, compared to a healthy brain of someone the same age, sex, and general body size. And this can help us understand and recognize that there is a disease happening in the person's brain that is causing their symptoms. A person living with dementia is not in control of their symptoms, and the normal pathways of communication between brain cells have permanently changed. A person living with dementia cannot just try harder, do harder, or focus harder. It is out of their control. And this is something very important for us to understand. Some things to notice when you compare the two sides of this image. The first is global atrophy, meaning that all areas of the brain have shrunk as cells have died. We also see significantly enlarged ventricles. In a healthy brain, the image on the right or the left, these ventricles are small, fluid-filled gaps between various bits of brain tissue. You can see that in the brain with advanced Alzheimer's, these gaps have grown significantly as the brain cells surrounding them have died. As various parts of the brain are damaged, some of the changes can include loss of depth perception and as well to peripheral vision, difficulty with any task that requires steps in a particular order, for instance, getting dressed, difficulty in speaking or in understanding what others say, and even balance and gait difficulties may be experienced by some people living with dementia. You may see an inability to retain memory of the recent past, loss of vocabulary, and difficulty with recognizing familiar faces, objects, or places. Other changes that might be seen or experienced are that the person appears apathetic, uninterested, and has difficulty focusing or maintaining their concentration. For many dementias, but especially with Alzheimer's disease, there are profound changes in an area known as the hippocampus. In the brain on the right with severe Alzheimer's disease, there is a cavity where the hippocampus should be. The hippocampus is the major short-term memory processing center where verbal and visual memories are processed. When we refer to verbal memories, these are words, so they're memories related to what we read or say or hear. Now, visual memory lets us recognize objects, faces, and places to guide us around our environment. So, if you are a person living with dementia, does this image help you to understand some of the changes you yourself are experiencing? Or if you're caring for someone living with dementia, does this image help you to understand why the person you are caring for has changed? This image is just a good visual reminder as to the changes that are taking place in the person living with dementia. So how does dementia affect communication? Although each individual with dementia is unique, for most, the changes in the brain have a profound effect on the language abilities of the person living with dementia. And those changes, as you can imagine, can cause great frustration and along with that, misunderstanding. If the part of the brain that processes language coming in and being interpreted is damaged, it may seem that the person is hard of hearing because they aren't reacting correctly when someone is speaking to them. Often the speaker then just gets slower and louder, but it may not be the ears that are affected at all, but the parts of the brain that make sense of the sounds coming into the ears. If the part of the brain that processes language going out and being understood by others is damaged, speech may be slurred or very slow or completely incomprehensible. People listening may not take the time to try to understand what is being said, or may dismiss the person trying to speak by making assumptions regarding their level of comprehension, when it actually has nothing to do with the comprehension. Or it may be that the vocabulary of the person living with dementia has been affected, and they have those struggles to find words that they're looking for. And this causes them to have pauses in conversation. Unfortunately, in a social setting, conversation usually moves very quickly, and therefore it may move on without them. All of the changes in the brain that we just talked about are key factors to consider when attending social gatherings, which for many of us are a much bigger part of our lives during the holiday season, whether these be parades, spiritual services, or family gatherings. Just like a person with a broken leg in a cast wouldn't expect to be joining family and friends for an afternoon of tobogganing, the same is for a person that is living with dementia. There are changes in the brain and everybody needs to make adjustments for these based on their abilities and the needs of the person. Some of the changes we hear about from people themselves who are living with dementia are that they may require increased concentration to follow conversations. They lose their train of thought more often. They often find that they have trouble staying on topic, need more time to respond to questions, have trouble finding the right word. They have difficulty following multiple step instructions. And finally, this one in particular can be very difficult and challenging at this time of the year when there's a lot of social activity happening. A lot of people have expressed difficulty understanding humor, jokes, and fast talk. These changes tend to create an experience of increased frustration. So how might the changes to the brain that we have already discussed affect how a person living with dementia might experience the holidays? This time of the year, there are often gatherings, as we've mentioned, where there are a lot of people and a lot of different activities happening at the same time. Background noises, lots of visual stimuli, unfamiliar places, large group of peoples, noise and a hectic pace can create a lot of anxiety. And for all of us, irrespective if we are cognitively intact or not, anxiety causes our brain function to decline. As I've mentioned, dementia can and does affect any of the 5 senses, and these, as we know, are vision, smell, touch, taste, and hearing. So they are impacted in one way or the other. Due to sensory overload, a person living with dementia can find it increasingly difficult to connect with others. And what we find often is that because of this, they become frustrated, and they may respond to this frustration by withdrawing. So this may lead to them not wanting to attend social gatherings, possibly even making excuses why they can't. Or if they do attend these gatherings, they may just not participate in any way. In some cases, they may seek out a quiet place away from all the activity. This is often a time of year where the changes associated with dementia may be particularly acute. For many people, the holidays are already a stressful time just to start out with. You add the challenges of caregiving to the holidays, and that can be a recipe for a very high degree of stress. And then for the person living with dementia, the combination of dementia, all the changes that have occurred in the brain, the frustration of that, and then you add the holidays to that, and that can certainly be a recipe for feeling very overwhelmed. It's important to acknowledge that the changes have happened and will continue to happen, and that you will continue to manage those changes as best as you can. For both of you, though, this can be a time of a lot of grief. Grief welling up as some of the losses come to the fore. For example, just forgetting a grandchild's name, or perhaps the person living with dementia was always the clown in the family and is just not able to be the same joyous center of attention. And people notice, family notice, and they miss that. The person themselves misses that. It's important to recognize and acknowledge those losses and learn to recognize the accompanying grief that can be triggered. So think about it. How are you managing your grief? Have you recognized and acknowledged that those losses are indeed losses and that they will cause a sense of grief? The stress of the holidays and the realities of living with dementia may also bring up some difficult family dynamics. Both caregivers and people living with dementia need to remember yourselves in all of this. So important. You won't be able to do everything you want or feel you should. Unfortunately, we do see this, and one of the reasons for this webinar is to do our very best to avoid this, is that at this time of the year, burnout is a real possibility. Try to enjoy the people and not worry about the details. So relationship over tasks. And then one of the big areas that we find with people at this time of the year when they're trying to do everything or keep traditions is this feeling of guilt. And so trying to work through that feeling. Take the time and space you need to acknowledge, manage your losses and grief. Most of us have traditions around different events this time of the year. It could be a big group of people going out to a seasonal parade, or a house-to-house traveling meal with lots of laughter and silliness to enjoy. Memories that we look back on, traditions that we hold dear. There are often a number of traditions associated with the holidays, and along with that is a level of elevated expectations. Dementia means that both the caregiver and the person living with dementia have to be aware of this unfortunately uninvited guest that is now a part of every day. And that means that it is critical to focus on the most important pieces of our tradition. If you can discuss this with your care partner or with your person living with dementia, it is helpful to do that now, early, in the holiday season. One of the most important things you can do is to adjust your expectations. Consider how you can alter your traditions a little bit, or a lot, or adapt it, and still feel okay. What does altering the tradition mean to you? So to help you to understand this a little bit more and to unpack it, think about what is the most important for, first of all, the person living with dementia, and then for the caregiver, and thirdly, for other family members. That is, try to identify the tradition that means the most to you. Once you've identified it, you need to take the next step, a very important step. Go even farther to identify what parts are key for you to retain and what you can let go of or adapt, and what parts you can break down and possibly share. That can help you to consider how you can recreate some family traditions where the outcome will be good for everyone. So it's often a balancing act between competing needs and desires, between your need to make changes to help to ensure greater chance of success and enjoyment for both yourself and the person living with dementia, and the desire to continue with those special, long-held family or personal traditions. So for instance, if you've always been the person that prepared the meal at this time, a special event at this time of the year, and family come over to your house, you host it and you prepare the meal. Could you consider doing a potluck? Or maybe it seems overwhelming even to be hosting this year. What about asking somebody else to host? And we've heard from families that have taken it even to the next step, and that is meeting in a restaurant. What about how you feel about decorating? Is that overwhelming? Something that you know that you loved to do in the past, you enjoyed getting your house ready for the season, but it just seems like a big overwhelming task at the moment. Consider having a decorating party, inviting people over and enjoying that together. So when you consider some of the different adaptations that you can do your best to involve the person living with dementia. People living with dementia are increasingly reminding us to include them in any plans and preparations. I really love their motto, nothing for us without us. So that is, it's important to involve the person with preparations, involve the person with conversation and activities. So often we think about the losses, but try to focus on remaining abilities. You may be surprised just at how many remaining abilities there still are. And then, important for both the person living with dementia and the care partner, keep a balance between quiet time and stimulation. So we've talked about adjusting your expectations, but it may not just be your expectations. You might need to help other people adjust their expectations as well. For example, if your adult children are coming home to visit over the holidays from out of town, they may not be aware of some of the changes that your person living with dementia has experienced, and therefore they may not actually understand or appreciate some of the changes that you've decided to make, some of the ways you've decided to simplify. If it is your wife, for example, you might hear your kids say, "Mom's not that bad. Of course she should come with us when we go around the city looking at lights. Or of course she should come and do Christmas shopping with us." It's not only your own expectations, but also those of other people that may cause some stress or a great amount of stress. So this is the time that you may need to step back and do a bit of education, helping family and friends understand that dementia means that there are changes in the brain and that you are trying to maximize the chances of a successful holiday season for everyone. If at all possible, if both caregiver and person living with dementia can express this together to family members, That can help and may be very effective. But unfortunately, it may be that the person living with dementia has difficulty communicating successfully, and you might need to speak for them because you are the person who knows them best. So some ways to simplify that can help both of you. Keep preparation to a minimum. This is easier once you've identified the key components of holiday traditions that you need to keep, as we spoke earlier. And then the importance of simplifying the meal. Consider paper plates and napkins. The part where you're able to share, ask for help. And this could be potluck meals. Maybe you need some assistance setting up the room or cleaning. Possibly for the care partner who needs to go and do some extra shopping this time of the year, other commitments. Ask family or friends to spend time with the person living with dementia. Just another wonderful opportunity to connect on a personal level. However, do consider that it's very important, especially if these changes are taking place in the person with dementia's own home environment. Keep some of those changes to a minimum. Lots of changes in their own environment can be confusing. Another important aspect is respecting the person's daily routine. And by daily routine, we talk about meal times, their bedtime routine. Does the person usually take a nap every afternoon? What about walk opportunities? Is that something that they do on a regular basis? And then are there any activities that they are used to doing and enjoy? This season can be a wonderful time for reminiscing, so plan activities that can be shared by all generations. Consider creating some special story photo albums, or even just a series of meaningful photos that family members can use to reminisce or to hear stories from before they were born. Think about what seasonal music is especially meaningful. What does the person enjoy? What did they enjoy in their past? And suggest family and friends talk about that music that they hear. Pull out some favorite ornaments and decorations and point those ones out to visitors as talking points. Perhaps these are decorations that the person produced themselves when they were children. Consider all 5 of the person's senses, especially for visits in long-term care. Nice hand lotion for a hand massage, warm cup of rich cocoa, spices related to the foods of the season, music or reading stories or just talking together. And then Skype visits with distant family can be especially meaningful at this time of the year. So when you're thinking about gift giving, early in the disease progression, you might want to consider activity books like crossword puzzles or strategy games, classic movies and television shows that can stimulate the person, music that the person enjoyed, and definitely, as we mentioned before, the memorable photo albums. As the disease progresses, consider the person's changing needs. You may want to make use of erasable whiteboards that highlight key rooms or areas in a person's home, a large typed clock that highlights both the date and time, automatic night lights that will light as soon as it gets dark may be valuable, an automatic medication dispenser. And then think about some simple craft activities that will inspire reminiscing. At the later stages of dementia, sensory stimulating gifts can include items such as a fluffy bathrobe or a soft blanket in a favorite color, comfortable clothes like sweatsuits and shoes with Velcro ties that can make dressing and undressing easier on a loved one, a doll or stuffed animal, and music and CDs that feature songs from your loved one's childhood or teenage years. There are often additional things such as decorations, lights that come into our homes for the holidays, and because dementia is a progressive disease, what was perfectly safe last year might not be safe this year. So because of the changes in the brain caused by the dementia, that can include changes in peripheral vision, hearing, comprehension, physical balance and mobility, even sense of touch and temperature, and many others, we do need to consider safety, especially at this time of the year. So take a survey of the house, looking for tripping hazards, extra electrical cords, stairs. Avoid small ornaments or hard candies. Consider that it may no longer be safe to leave your person next to the fireplace or have open burning candles. You may have a family member living in care and are anticipating a lot of extra visitors at this time of the year. Family and friends from out of town want to see their family member, so it's important to plan wisely for these visits. Consider visiting early in the day, allow more time between visits, keep the visits shorter. Important thing is to keep the groups that are coming to see the person at one time smaller. And then use a quiet room. Ask staff for suggestions on a quieter area where you could meet. Now, if the person with dementia who's living in care is wanting to come home for the celebrations, or you would like to have them home, a good idea is to plan short trial visits at home before the holidays to see whether the visits are pleasure or more a source of confusion and distress. If you do decide to not bring the person home, you could then consider celebrating at the care home. Often they'll have spaces or rooms that you can book for your family to use. There also may be special holiday meal times at the care home that you can join in and spend that time with your family member. If you have any questions about information you've heard here or any other questions about living with dementia, please don't hesitate to call one of our First Link Dementia Helplines. We're open Monday to Friday between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m.